Hi everyone, Gareth here. Just to let you know that if you would like to support the production of the Music Room podcast, you can. Just head to musicroompodcast.uk/support or click the link in the show notes. Okay, on with the show.
4, 3, 2, 1. Cue Gareth.
Welcome to the Music Room. This time in the Music Room.
One thing I often tell people is, how does sound sound? I know that sounds probably stupid, but if you take an EQ and shove a high cut on it so you're just hearing the sub, how does that sub sound? Can you hear the sub? Then how do the bass frequencies sound? Does that make you just go, ooh, or is that, ooh, that's horrible?
Welcome to the Music Room, the show where I chat with music industry professionals about what they're up to before going back in time to discover how it all began for them. This episode marks a tiny change in the guest lineup, and you may have noticed I said music industry professionals there. I'm always thinking about ways to help composers, songwriters and musicians to navigate their musical lives, and I've come to the conclusion that as well as hearing from other composers, songwriters and musicians who've had success and can therefore pass on tips and advice, there are other people in the industry that can offer really valuable and relevant advice too. By the way, if you enjoyed this episode or you feel like you've learned something by listening to it, I'd be so grateful if you could share the episode, which you can do from wherever you're listening to it, whatever app you listen to podcasts in. Share it with a friend via text or share it to your Instagram or whatever you crazy kids are using these days. I love producing this show, and it means so much when listeners appreciate that effort and pass it forward to people who might enjoy it or benefit from it. So thanks in advance. Today we have a guest whose main role is mixing and mastering. John Elleson-Hartley has a client list as long as your arm, and for very good reason. We'll be chatting about what he's up to. He'll be offering some mixing and mastering tips. And of course, John will be leaving an item and piece of advice later on for you to find. But before that, music stories. The European branch of First Artist Management, FAM, or FAM, the international talent agency representing composers, music supervisors and music editors, has announced a second edition of its UK Composer Assistant and Mentor Programme, or CAMP. Ivor Novello award-winning composer Hannah Peel will be the CAMP 2024-25 ambassador and is co-curating the programme. Composer mentors already signed up include Music Room guest Alex Baranowski, Natalie Holt and Ray Olanuga, with others to be announced. The initiative is designed for young music makers from underrepresented groups wanting to break into the industry, with the aim of launching new voices and creating new role models. And a couple of new releases from members of the Music Room community. Film composer turned songwriter Rich Chance has a quirky song out called Picture Show, all about robot spider zombie dogs, which he posted on 28th of June. You can find him on Spotify, etc. at Rich Chance, or follow his socials, Rich Chance Music on Instagram and Facebook, or Rich Chance Songs on TikTok. Marco Ianello has a new EP called Ambient Miniatures Volume 1. He says, I decided to repurpose a few demo tracks I did for a sample library developer into an EP, plus an outsider written to a brief that did not make the cut. The result is a small collection of so-called miniatures to take the listener through a journey of ambient soundscapes and lo-fi beats. That's fantastic. Really nice to see some new releases. And those are the music stories. Mixing and mastering engineer John Elleson-Hartley is incredibly passionate about making music sound as good as possible, collaborating personally with composers and artists to help bring their tracks and albums to life, ensuring they are completely happy before releasing their music to the world. John also offers one-to-one online music production coaching and advice for those wanting to improve their skills and sound. Clients include Emmy and RTS winning composer Nanita Desai, Ivor Novello and BAFTA winning Arthur Sharp, Ivor nominated composer Chris Rowe, Ivor winning Ian Livingston, Joanna Carcelis, Alex Parsons, Marianne Fisher, Marcus Hedges, and many more. Wow, there are a few music room guests in there as well. Let's get into the music room to find out what John is up to now before heading back in time to find out how it all began for him. Here we go. John Elleson-Hartley, mixing and mastering legend. Welcome to the music room.
Hi, Gareth. Thank you for that. Lovely to be here having a chat with you.
Yeah, we've already had a big chat, and I realised that I really needed to hit record to capture it. So I'm really looking forward to this chat today. So you've had an interesting week. I've seen from your socials that you've just been to the Develop conference.
Yes,
So it's been a busy
down in
week for you.
Brighton.
What is the Develop conference? And what is the Develop conference? I'm going to ask you another question about networking as well after that.
Well, the Develop conference, I don't know that much of it. It was my first time there, and it's for gaming, basically everything about that side of the industry. So anybody can be there, from the developers all the way through to actors and composers and everybody in between, really. But yes, very much, as you say, it's a networking opportunity and just a gathering of lots of good people. And it's really exciting. There's so many things going on, and lots of freebies as well in there in the expo, and lots of talks. So many people, seeing what's actually happening in the industry, and stuff to learn, basically.
Yeah, that's something we touched on before hitting record, was the emphasis you put on networking, not just for looking for clients, but also looking for peers in the industry and learning from the conference and learning from other people at the conference as well. Did you find that it was a useful conference from that perspective?
Absolutely. I mean, what we do is all about people, making those connections, and to actually see people who you already know, to then maybe people who you've sort of known online and actually get to meet them in real life, and all the way through to somebody who's completely different, nothing to do with what you do. For an example, my friend Marcus Hedges and I, we went to the Game Audio drinks yesterday night. That's very good English. And there were 4 women there when we came in, and they had all the lovely sofa and seats. And it's like, oh, we're the comfy piece, join. And they were actors, voice actors, and motion capture, that side of things.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And being able to say what they do, but then the passion and energy, which then we pick up on that. And I always come away from, I've learned something about something I had no idea about, the technology that's being used, the difficulties, and even thinking about funding behind some of the stuff they're doing. And yeah, if you're just perked up. And then like today, it's like, right, I've got to get on with more work and more this. So I think being fueled up by meeting other wonderful people and what they're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Conferences are good for that, aren't they? To inspire you to, maybe perhaps sometimes we think, oh, it's just another day. But to go and, like you say, mix with other people, it's inspiring, it's invigorating.
And I imagine you get that because you've gone to some podcast events, haven't you, as well? Because
yes.
you're building this and this amazing music room and everything else. I was going to say conglomerate then, but
Conglomerate,
But yeah, how do you feel from coming back from there? Do you get a boost having learned things?
Yeah, similar. I mean, it's a bit weird networking in a different industry almost. It's a little bit of a Venn diagram with audio in the middle. But yeah, I feel exactly the same. I think also it's just taking time out of your normal routine. Just kickstarts your brain, doesn't it? So even on the train to these things, you're thinking, oh, right, I'm taking a step back. I can think of my kind of business as a whole, and it sparks ideas. And certainly meeting people, then that accelerates, doesn't it? And by the time you're back in the studio, you're ready to go, you're raring to go. Yeah.
And being out of your comfort zone. And I think when going to events, when we work in our own little space, it's nice and quiet, and I can just be here and, let's do this. Yeah. And no, I don't want to go somewhere. But actually, once you go there, usually there's at least one person who you come away going, that was so good to have met that person at least. It's well worth going out.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yes, I think both of our advice there is go to networking events, go to conferences, because you just don't know what you'll come away with. even if it's
And
just an
yeah.
idea in your head.
Well, I think
Yeah.
more this where we've been so used to socials now. I think they're sort of failing from where they used to be and really connecting people. It's just seems to have become stale.
Yeah.
And it's great to still make the connections, but very much more of get back to the human connection.
Yeah.
And it's about working with somebody, collaborating, trusting them, building that bond over time, and having fun and
Yeah.
working with good people, basically.
Absolutely. Here's to that. So on your website, John, you have a wall of artwork. It's your famous wall that you post sometimes on your socials.
Yeah.
TV and film and all the releases you've worked on. It must feel pretty amazing to look at all those releases, knowing that you had a hand in making the music sound as good as it possibly can. How does that feel for you?
It's a bit mind-boggling at times, and I do need
I
that
bet.
there to look back because I tend to have quite a rotation of work, and sometimes it's like, what did I do last week or the week before? And it's very sobering, I suppose, to just load that up. And I create the big wall thing in myself in Pixelmator, which is like a Photoshop thing, and it does take a bit of time. But it is also time to just go, oh yeah, I did that, and oh wow, that person who I worked with there, and oh they create, oh I must go and have a listen to that again, because sometimes you forget what you've done,
Mm.
and then re-experience the emotional, ooh wow, because the people I get to work with, they just write really good music,
That's
and
interesting,
the
actually. So
creativity.
you look back at previous work. Does it inform you in your future work? Do you suddenly listen to something and go, "Ooh, I fiddled with the high end there." That
No, I
no,
have different ways of thinking. It's like when I was a composer, I would be working that way. Then you mix in a different way, and when I now mix and master, I listen to sound. So particularly when I'm mastering, I'm not really listening to the music. I'm listening to the sound.
right.
So it's only maybe the next day where I'll put the whole lot on and just listen, or even sometimes with our perfection. I don't know how you are. Um, Perfection doesn't exist, but you want to be as good as possible. And it's weird that once I've let something go and it's been released, maybe a week or two after, I'd actually just listen to it just to enjoy it. And that's when I relax. I'm like, oh, yeah, I think I did a pretty good job on that. Okay, right. Whew. And then it's put to bed.
Yeah.
It's just the way I work, I suppose.
That's nice to actually listen back and think, right, I covered all of those sonic things. Now I can just
Yeah.
enjoy the music.
And
Yeah.
also, being afraid of, or not being afraid of making mistakes. And there's always and what is a mistake anyway? There might be a resonant frequency of one thing in a track that I'm like, ooh, that could have been a little better. But I'm not then beating myself up. It's like, no, I'm happy. It's good. And ultimately, my clients are happy because you've sent something back to them and they're happy to release that. So that's the job, really.
Fantastic. And speaking to that, for a lot of composers, songwriters, and musicians who perhaps don't have the budget to outsource mixing
Hmm.
and mastering, what kind of tips can you share for them to look out for when they're mixing and mastering their own music, and maybe even at the recording stage?
The main thing for me, which it always comes back to, is learning your gear. So if you're working on headphones or speakers and the room that they're in, and preferably if you can do some treatment in that room if you're using speakers, but get the best possible ones you can, and then learn how music sounds through them. And that also is the same with your phone speakers, car speakers, anything like that, so that whenever you make any judgment when you're mixing or creating, even if you completely messing something up, making it distorted and go, what the hell, I'm just going to be stupid with this. Yeah, throw everything at it. But if you know that it still sounds okay in your headphones, then you can have confidence. I always say, does it sound right? It's like, why did you do it? And does it sound right? And if you can answer those questions, then it's like, fine, don't worry about it wasn't done the right way or not. I often go back to the creativity time of, say, the Beatles, where they were just really pushing boundaries and let's grab this and do the other. But you had a check at the end. Does it sound right? So yeah, I get that quite a bit of people saying, "Oh, I don't know if it's the right way," or EQ before compressor or after. well, there's
Yeah.
ways of knowing.
Yeah, yeah, and I
And
guess
also,
that, composers will know that there's no right way to write music, so for
hmm,
someone to say, this is how you should be doing it is utter rubbish, by definition of being creative, you're creating something from nothing, and that's entirely up to you. But I guess from that kind of perspective, from the composer, songwriter, musician perspective,
hmm.
it's a bit of a dark art, isn't it? The mixing, mastering side, it's more kind of technical, more sciencey, just from our kind of point of view.
Sort of. And again, I was guilty of using many years ago, the dark art of mastering. And it's like, ooh, which is absolutely, I was going to say another word, but it's absolute rubbish. Um,
Darth
but
Ellison-Hartley.
it's like the wizard. I've been called a wizard
Yes,
and a
wizard.
warlock at times. Yeah, it's
Oh,
like,
oh,
so
okay.
I don't mind that. But,
You can
um,
both create magic and destroy.
oh, I like that. That's going to be my tagline. Um, but yeah, it's the thing about just learning the basics. So even as you say, capturing sound from the beginning, always having things as good as possible, sounding as good as possible, knowing the basics of EQ. And one thing I often tell people is, how does sound sound? I know that sounds probably stupid, but if you take an EQ and shove a high cut on it, so you're just hearing the sub, how does that sub sound? Can you hear the sub in what you're listening to? Some headphones or speakers, you won't even hear it. So it's being aware that you're not hearing it. Then how do the bass frequencies sound? How the mids and the very high, that lovely little sizzly top end, does that make you just go, ooh, or is that, ooh, that's horrible?
Yeah, yeah,
So that all goes back to, again, listening to a ton of music on your
yeah,
gear so that you know what is or isn't right. And also there's no, quote, right sound. You can
yeah,
listen to so many masters, totally different, but there is a sort of accepted quality level that's there.
yeah. And coming full circle to what you were saying before about does it feel right? You
Yeah.
know, not relying on what you're seeing in front of you in terms of numbers and
Hmm.
waves and whatever, and thinking, oh, actually, that vocal sounds really piercing. So
That's it. That's exactly
don't rely
things
on
like
the
that.
numbers in front of you. What does it sound like? And
Yeah.
go from there.
And certainly numbers now, where, I mean, the whole LUFS thing is awesome in terms of mastering and pulling back from the loudness war to a degree. But one of my worst things you see now is like, what LUFS should I mix my track to? You shouldn't even really be thinking about LUFS at the mix. And
By the
you may
way,
or may not.
could you
Yes.
explain Luffs just for people
Oh,
who
how?
have no idea?
Loudness units. I'm not that technical on these things. Is it
Sorry, putting
loudness
you on the
units
spot.
full scale, isn't it? Yes. Oh, let me just Google that. Um,
But it's about loudness, isn't it?
yes, and it's not peaks. So there was a thing called RMS years ago we used to use, and we still use it, root mean squared, which again, I just say that so it makes me sound like I know what I'm talking about. But
Wow.
yeah, how loud things are. And generally now you have an integrated loudness, which is how loud the entire track is from start to finish. And that's how, when it goes onto streaming, it will be adjusted up or down, or, well, no, usually down, not up so much, so that most of the tracks are as similar in level as possible.
Yeah.
And then you don't have to worry about peaks. But I also know with production libraries, I've talked with composers, and it's this thing where some people, they hear things and they go, oh, the tracks you send in must be this LUFS or peaking at this LUFS. Well, is that integrated as in the overall track? Is it momentary, which is the short one? Is it short-term LUFS? But they've just come out with a figure, and then composers are worrying, well, what should I do? I don't
So
know.
the difference between, say, a hip hop track and an orchestral classical track with the
Mm.
all the dynamics that are involved in that can be quite enormous level wise, can't it? When you're playing it back on your streaming service or whatever.
Yeah, and if it's going to be mastered, it doesn't matter. Just leave some headroom, and
Yeah.
it's going to be sorted out. Does it sound good? And that's the other, you're back to, does it sound good? Send it off to be polished. Done.
Yeah. Leave it to John the Warlock and all will be well.
Yeah, and there's just so many things like that you can do, but ultimately the tips of things is just play and have fun. So if you've learnt what things sound like, mess with it. I'll often, if I load up a plug or even a distortion, think, just crank it up to all full. What is this doing? And then pull it back and go, yes, no, I like that. And there's also a really good thing. I use Logic, but particularly for saturation plugins that you want to see is if you put the Logic EQ and then before that use the test oscillator and make sure you mute because otherwise you're just going to get that beep coming out. And then you've got to put the saturation or any plugin before the EQ. So I'm using the EQ as an analyzer basically, and if you've got an analyzer, use that. But you'll see with say that 1 kilohertz test tone, and then you put your plugin on and then saturate it. You can see all the little harmonics coming in, and it's like, oh, so visually being able to see that this is what's happening to my sound. I always find that quite useful as well.
Oh, try that. I'm going to have to listen back to this and try it for myself.
Well, sometimes you can do that and you just crank it full up and you go, oh, that's not actually doing much. And then you add another thing which you think is quite subtle and you go, oh, look at all that colouring going on up there. That's interesting.
Amazing. And of course, you have an online coaching service as well. So even if people want to do it themselves or are in a position to outsource that, you can go online like this and talk things through with clients, can't you?
Yeah, I find that's become more popular over this last year or two. And mainly you hear more about how, the internet was going to be this freedom of information and it's going to be amazing and wonderful. And now we have just so much information and some disinformation or not so good. Do this every time on your vocal parts. And generally what I'm hearing is that people just don't know which thing to do or not. So there's a confusion. And I love being able to just, either in maybe one session all the way to almost continuous, that you can answer their queries and then they go off and you can just see them heading off because you've just answered an issue or something they were frustrated with. Click, done.
Yeah, which can change everything. The worst position that people who record find themselves in is 6 months later, that little niggle that they had, it's kind of spoiling it for them 6 months later when they think back and say, I wish I could have fixed that little thing that was annoying me at the time.
It's a pet thing I have of, I want people to be more confident. And that's in what they're doing, but in life as well. You can learn confidence because I think some people say, no, I can't. Some people are lucky to have been raised in a family environment where there are confident parents and they're introduced to different lifestyle and everything else. And it's like, yes, go out there and I shall do. And hello, handshake with somebody, and seeing some. It's those basics of talking, whereas so many people now after school or university, you're hearing they're not comfortable because they've just been behind a screen most of the time, and then going out, like we're talking about networking, going out and doing that and actually just seeing. So, and then to be able to do that approach with work and just go, I know my sound, I know this is basic EQ, a compressor will do this. Don't get hung up on your compressor. Logic, I will talk about Logic because that's the one I do. But you've got all variety of compressors in there. You can pick any of them. It really doesn't matter. But there are favorites and there are particular things and characteristics. But you can do some changing. Does it sound right? Job done. Move on. If you then wanted somebody to come and look at it and say, how did I do or what? Fine. But learning the basics. And that's very often what I cover and clarifying, I suppose.
Excellent. I will put a link in the show notes for people to rush down and get in touch with you if they're having a bit of trouble with their mixes. Are we ready to go back in time, John? I want to know how it all began for you.
And now, back in time.
Here we are. And strangely enough, because I'm away from the studio, I am actually in my childhood bedroom.
That's amazing.
So that's quite pertinent and a little bit freaky. But there we go.
So good.
So I am truly back in time.
You look younger as well.
Oh, now I know you're lying. But that's very nice of you to say. So here we are. How did it all start for John? Was music a part of your life from an early age? Was it a bit later? How did it all start for you?
It started around when I was 7, and back in England, where we always did recorders for everything. That was you got given is it an Alios plastic descant recorder or something,
The
and it
brown
was
with the kind of
oh,
cream
high
ends.
quality, love
Oh,
it. Oof. And then they got a treble version of that. But yeah, my junior school had a really good teacher, and I wish I could remember names, but you just had that involvement of being part of a group, and we must have sounded quite hellish with a whole group of like 10 to 20 recorders going off. But I was always encouraged by my parents to learn, not in a musical household. My dad played piano. We had a baby grand, which he dabbled on but didn't really learn, and my mum didn't play anything. But I was just encouraged that way, and I've done recorders, piano, clarinet, and singing. So those were my
wow.
main
Multi-instrumental.
approaches. Yeah, and I mean, recorder was my first instrument until I was about 18 or so. I mean, I've had a gorgeous handmade treble recorder which sounded like a wooden flute. Um,
Wow.
Unfortunately, I
See,
had to give up.
I did a very similar thing. It was kind of the
Yeah,
equivalent of the wider opportunities, isn't it? Where every kid in the class got a recorder. I went on to the treble as well. Um,
right.
but yeah, it didn't last that long. That's amazing.
Well, yeah, it's just one of those things. It was good, but also the clarinet I had to give up after grade 5 because it gave me tendonitis in my wrist. Because I don't know
Oh,
when,
crikey.
being a recorder. I'm showing you now, but you can't see.
Yes,
But you
the
you
thumb.
put the recorder on the pad of your thumb, whereas the clarinet, the rest goes onto the side of your thumb, and that basically I had this massive lump come up in my wrist, and I had to have cortisol injections and things. It's like, sadly, I had to give up the clarinet because it just kept on doing this,
Right.
even wearing straps and things to try and take the weight off. But no, just a varied bit of music, and very much that rotating bit of concerts, exams, competitions, and just doing this over and over again. I did, thankfully, and when in hindsight you can look back and go, thanks to my dad for making sure I was doing my practice. It's like, do your practice, because sometimes you're doing 3 or 4 hours practice a day, and it's just getting through that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I did some
And
jazz from the
yeah.
ages 13 and 14, and do sort of like traditional 1930s, 40s
Right, hang
jazz.
on. Rewind. You did some jazz.
Yes, I did some jazz.
Can you elaborate on that? I mean, was this clarinet? Was this
Oh,
different? Was
sorry,
it
no,
your
piano.
recorder?
No, that was piano. Oh, jazz recorder.
Jazz
Now there's a
recorder.
classic. Oh, hello. I feel an album coming on.
The John Ellison-Hartley trio.
Would you like to join me? Um,
Uh,
yeah, it was piano, and very much retired jazz band leader. He was in his 70s, and again, it's that thing of somebody who lived that era and came up in it, and to be able to do stride bass piano, and I mean, I can't do it
oh
very
man.
quickly now, but and your hands just a blur. But the
Yeah.
hours of practice of just doing that, and I wish I'd done jazz much earlier because you're learning chords. So through my classical training, you were learning one note after the other. And once I did jazz, I'm like, why wasn't I taught this? An F minor 7. And I'm like, that's that. And you start seeing the shape rather than, having to work out every note of a chord. That's how my brain was working.
Mm.
So that was quite a revelation, I
And in a
think. And
way,
also,
just going back to what you're saying about confidence, that I think with
mm,
jazz, you're taught confidence as well because you're taught progressions, but then you have to have the confidence to
hmm
improvise,
and there's no
which is
wrong
quite
note in
amazing.
improvisation. You just
There you
move off it.
go. Yeah,
I love that. It's that
lovely.
I love finding a dodgy dissonant note and then hammering it home a bit, and then moving off. And you're like, because it gives that emotional ups and downs. If everything's
Yeah,
just nice,
I
it's
think
not
the
moving.
phrase is dissonance and harmony, isn't it? Um,
Ooh,
Beethoven was good at that. He'd
Mm.
go at the dissonance and then create this harmonious, lovely soundscape. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I loved one thing on that where my publisher for years ago, something that stuck with me when I was composing, instead of doing octave strings, which is the usual thing, people are doing this lovely thing, adding like a major seventh or a flat nine or ninth and just doing that up and down adds that little color of something.
Yeah.
So it's not just boring octave. You've got this nice parallel ninths or sevenths moving. Things like that, playing with that dissonance and character.
Fabulous. So we're up to trying jazz out. What happened from then?
Mm-hmm.
So we're getting to the end of your schooling.
Yeah, schooling and into uni, where I actually dropped out of uni at the point. That just wasn't my bit. I went to Birmingham, and lovely place, but it just wasn't for me. And back then, there weren't as many courses like now, where I really should have gone to a studio technical course. And they had a studio there, but you were taught how to chop up tape and make wonderful, mysterious sounds. And like, well, this isn't recording music. And from my school, it was very much where you go to uni and you do this. And I'd always done music, so it's just, okay, you go and do music. But I did have a year at the Conservatoire in Birmingham on piano there, which was a great experience. And again, you learn more on that and pick up some tips, which throughout all of my training, I then passed on because I taught piano for quite a few years as well. So that was really good.
I was going to say, no matter what decisions you make in life, I don't think anything's ever wasted. So,
Oh, no.
whatever your experience, whether you think that's not for me, you still take that experience with you, don't you?
Yes, and the people you come across, all those little nuggets, as much as I know with, I can't remember which, was that at the Conservatoire, where again, a practicing technique for doing fast runs, rather than just going da 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 da, is to dot it both ways. So you go dun da dun da dun da dun dun, and then do da dun da dun da dun. So you're practicing pairs of notes very quickly. And I used to do that, and then just suddenly play it straight, fast. Wow, how did that? Little tips like that, and I always would be teaching that to my pupils, and that stemmed from one person, and then I pushed it on to many more from there. So, yeah, what can we learn and pass on?
So I'm sensing right up until that point, you're seeing yourself as a musician, maybe writing music. I don't know. Were you writing?
Oh yeah, I
well?
thought it was going to be little Mozart here with some manuscript and a pen or something.
Yeah. So, but this isn't where you are now. So, what happened in between your decision to become mixing and mastering legend Warlock? And
That's going to stick, isn't it? I'm
Mozart,
going to change my business cards. Yeah.
Yeah. So you've dropped out of uni.
Yeah.
Where did you go? What happened then?
Well, that was getting back home and then working at a petrol station for about 3 months, which is good. That was an experience. I think I got a
sobering moment,
some sort of qualification. But no, I started at a studio in Worcester, which again, that's happenstance of what carries on there. It's called the Old Smithy, and I met Paul Farrer there. So, I mean, most people have heard of Paul Farrer, and again, just looking back of when I first met him and how he would record, and I just said, if only I could work like he works. He's brilliant at analysing what people want and then putting that into music, and just, it needs this, 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 and this, put that together, job done. And I did sort of 18 months in that studio, and because it wasn't as busy at that point, I could literally go in the mornings. Or was it afternoon? No, mornings that I spend into early afternoon and just play with stuff and learn. And then when there were projects on, I could just look and then also learn about mic technique and positions. And also then I did a couple of own little sessions that came in, and just invaluable to be around that environment. And then also keeping that going, I went to work at what was called Kay's Catalogue back then in Worcester, which was a catalogue for for clothes and things like that.
Oh, right, yeah, the K's catalogue back in the day.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sort of like old school Amazon, where basically you're going around picking things out. And then I got to
Yeah.
manage one of the floors there after a few months of that, and it's like brilliant. And then you go off and thinking, right, okay, it's time. I've raised some money, and I've bought my JV 2080 synth, and a few other bits and bobs. I've still got my gear down here, my Akai S3000 XL sampler, and oh yeah, fancy stuff. But you had to earn and buy your equipment at that point.
They've probably got some listeners drooling at the mention of that.
It's fully packed out with the extra boards, isn't it?
Oh God.
Um, but it's that thing of, okay, I'm going to do composing, but how do you do it? And I had a friend who, he talked about the publisher who I then went with, and it was on the 5th attempt I was about to give up that I'd sent stuff to, and I was like, and also getting over that being knocked down, and also that love of creativity where you're very naive, thinking, oh, this is the best piece of music ever, and I've put my heart and soul into it, and oh, it's going to make me millions. And then they get, yeah, I could do with a little tweak or this, that, and yeah, try harder. Bum.
It
So
can be pretty demoralizing, can't it?
yeah, but thankfully he said, fine, that was good. And then I basically went into a whole load of production music and albums and things, and working several years for that, which reading plenty of Sound on Sound, which, yeah, that was just invaluable at that point. I was also lucky because I taught Paul White's daughter, so editor of Sound on Sound, Paul White, and he was just absolutely amazing and generous, and yeah, just some advice and things like that. It's we're back to, again, people. Who do you meet, and who are the people who can do that? And that's where I suppose I was helped, and I like to try and help now as well. It's like, it's that, I don't know what's the phrase, paying it forward sort of thing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And who cares what you might just be able to give something to somebody that lets them travel off and find their path.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's the same thing.
We've been in the game a few years now.
Yeah.
So we know exactly what it feels like to be in that position where you think, I am utterly lost. I don't know quite what to do. So to have just a little 5-minute chat and a friendly conversation for people who reach out is invaluable. You know what it feels like for them.
And they know what they're talking about, their experience. And it was the same thing, because living in Worcester, and you've got the Malvern area, there's a lot of musos there, and you had David Lowe as well. And it's just those people where you just get little nuggets and generosity, absolutely invaluable. And that, yeah, just developed as composing, doing everything. I mean, I remember I did a Latin, it wasn't salsa, but it was something else. But back then, I ended up going to the library to get the CDs out because we didn't have the streaming at that point. So it's like, come back and then learn all sorts of rhythms, and then put that album together, do a kids album, do some dance stuff, do some orchestral, really that mixture of music. And through that, then my publisher at around, what was it, about the year 2000, said, can you master this production album? And of course, the response you give is yes.
So that was completely out of the blue.
Yeah. It was literally, we've got this to do. And you work closely with somebody, and then that comes out. Yeah. And that again is, oh crap, right, go through all my old Sound on Sound magazines, go, oh yes, learn about this. But then I'd already learnt how my gear sounds. I think I had, is it not AKG? The DT150 headphones. I can't remember the make now. But they were closed, pretty decent bass response and everything else. And I used those to rely on because my speakers at the time, I think I was still working on my hi-fi speakers back then. And to be able to use that and just work probably 10 times as hard and do all the extra work for the money I actually got. But having about 6 different composers on that first album, and I couldn't get redos of the mixes or anything. So I always like trying to see how can I make this sound better that maybe isn't ideal in the first place. And then bringing them all together to make it a homogeneous album. And then probably after doing at least 1 or 2 a month of that. It took me about 2 years before I actually went, okay, I think I'm a mastering engineer now. I think I've done enough to be able to say, yes, I can do this. That's how
Yeah,
I got into
yeah.
mastering.
There's a little theme there because you're saying about composing for a production library and then coming back and saying, no, you need to tweak this. So you have to go through that time where you're learning in order to get to the point where you go, I can now do it. I'm now confident to do it.
But I would say I'm not totally confident now. And I think
Don't
if
say
you're
that,
ever
John.
no, but you know what I mean. There's always something to learn, and to be able to say I am the best, and I was like, that's rubbish. I believe I'm good at what I do, but I'm always double checking and listening. And I wonder if they like it. When you send something back, is the client happy? And have you done all the things, or maybe told them something that you spotted that they may fix? Have you done your job as the quality control side of the job as well? It's not just about working on the sound and giving them some feedback. Or I always remember one album had a track in it. I was like, there's something over there on that side. Is that deliberate? And they went back and they had a fader still up, which they hadn't intended. So it was just like, oh, thank heavens you spotted that. It's that sort of thing of working with somebody rather than just going, okay, there you go, pay me.
Yeah. And I can confirm that as well because you've stem mastered one of my EPs, and I can confirm
that's
this.
such a
It's
good
more
one.
more a collaboration working with you than it is a service. It's more kind of right. Together, we're going to take this and make it sound better than it could possibly be if you left it.
Yeah, and it's finding your sound. I mean, you did a wonderful EP for that, and it's just like how creative, and it makes you just go, ooh, that's what you want to have, that feeling. And it's having it back. So all the hours and work and time and money of your life getting to where you are is invested in this.
Yeah.
And then you're going to somebody who you're going to trust. And that, again, is a leap of faith because it's like, I could do it myself. But to hand it over to somebody who's then going to come back, that's quite nerve-wracking. So that's what I then feel. So I'm handing it back. And then for you to go, that I really like that. Or if it's a question of, I like it, but there's just a little bit too bright or something. That's your personal preference. Okay, lovely. We can tweak this. How's this now? Lovely. Happy with that.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
That's it.
And I think that's what you're saying is be confident with that, because I think a lot of people might feel a bit reluctant to point out to a mixing mastering engineer, actually, I don't like that bit because what do they know? So what you're saying is that's okay. It's a two-way conversation. If you have a preference for something in particular, then you should say so. You should speak up.
Yes, and also it is a service, and as much as hopefully you're working with somebody who is a good mastering engineer and they know, but also you're there to guide the client. Now, if the client has a particular liking to something that's really bright or really dark, that's their choice, and you can talk with them. You might get I've only done it once, I think, in my career, where I say, well, I can't do this because I wouldn't be happy with releasing that. And that's where you just have to be honest and say, clean slate, don't take any money, job done, thank you very much and good luck. But that's a personal thing as well. Whether that's the right thing for me to have done, I have no idea. But yeah, everybody's got their own thing. And then you're back to, again, if you know what the sound should be like that you want, and if the mastering person hasn't done it for you, then tell them. You're paying for it.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's cracking. So, John, I ask all of my guests to leave an item and a piece of advice in the music room for others to find. So what would you like to start with, your item or your advice?
The item is earplugs, and multiple pairs of earplugs, so you have them everywhere, just in case, wherever you are, to protect your hearing, which I know anybody who knows me, if you're out at an event, even at a talking event, whatever, you're generally up to like 85 to 90 decibels at least, and maybe above that. Even being on the tube in London, any environment, you're anywhere into 90 to the 100 decibels, and you can't recover your hearing. And if you want to work for as long as possible, it deteriorates over time anyway, naturally. So to keep it as good as possible, always have them. I must give you a link, actually. I think it was it Help for Hearing or something, where the brand of molded earplugs, ACS, they cost about £140 or something. But there's a service where if you prove that you work in the industry, you can get, it's about £50. So you get an ear test and get them molded. Okay. So things like that. If you want to look after it, and I haven't used my ACS ones for about 10 years because I shoved them through the washing machine and that sort of knackered them after 10 years of use. But yeah, getting even the little silicone ones, just shove them in and keep your hearing as good as possible.
Absolutely brilliant item. That's going in the music room. So what advice would you like to leave?
There's so many things you could do, but it's ultimately about the people and surrounding yourself with good people, removing the not good people because it's toxic. And it's very much that old thing of you become the people who surround you, who you're with, you pick up all these habits. It's a bit like when you grow up as a child, you get influenced by the bad person or something like that, and you pick up little things. So, yeah, when you're at events and in work, but also in personal life, who do you want to be, and who can challenge us? Who can we learn from, and who can we share with? So, yeah,
wow,
that would be my point.
Amazing. That goes into the music room. I hope listeners benefit from those two things. John Elleson-Hartley, it has been wonderful chatting with you. Thanks for joining me in the music room.
Thank you so much, Gareth. Absolute joy. Brilliant. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Music Room podcast today. If you'd like to know more about the show or the community that surrounds it, head to musicroom.community. The link is in the show notes.